Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Boys, Season 4, Episode 6. It's called Dirty Business. And I hesitated as I said that because it definitely was dirty business. I almost feel guilty for laughing as much as I did throughout some of this episode, as poor Huey is just being traumatized by Tech Knight and Ashley. They really, I did not expect them for that running joke. They started with Ashley a season or two ago, with her being this sort of dominatrix style character in private, to snowball into, no pun intended, to turn into this. So honestly, when they set up this character, this webbed, well, I can't remember. I don't think I ever quite caught the exact name. It was like Web Wonder or something like that. But Huey goes undercover as this web character because there's this party with a bunch of the 1%ers where Homelander and some of the others are going to schmooze them into joining in their coup, right, against the government. And they have Huey go undercover as this superhero who has a full suit and mask and all that into this party to try and plant bugs and hopefully lure Tech Knight out to the stables where they're going to grab him and find out what he's been talking to Sage about. That's the whole point of this. Doesn't get unscathed either, because the whole introduction of this character where he's giving this guy drugs that he expects that he wants, but it's actually Rohypnol, but has to inject it up his ass, and understandably is always kind of grossed out with this stuff, but which is probably why it was funnier that he's the one that had to do it. But this character, this web guy, has a web hole right above his ass crack, right, which accidentally goes into instead with the syringe. And as soon as we got to the party and it was Tech Knight and he was taking what he thought was this web guy, but it's actually Huey, down to the tech cave, which is actually a sex dungeon in this Batman ripoff character. When it takes him down there, I was like, wait a minute. He wants the web hole. That's why he wants this guy as his sidekick. He wants to shove his dick in the web hole, because that's his whole thing. Now, admittedly, I have a bit extra context here from Gen V, because there was a whole episode where he's obsessed with sticking his dick in anything that's a hole. Doesn't matter what it is. Could be a donut, could be a random hole in a tree. He'll just stick it in. And that's all I could think, is he wants the unique hole. Because he even has a line later on where he says he's so bored because everyone has the exact same holes. So so all of this is just the absurd, dark sense of humor that The Boys has. Huey being tickled, as Ashley just says, as Huey himself puts it later on, just says some horrible, horrible things. Obviously, it never crossed a very specific line. It threatened, obviously, a lot of things, but it never crossed a very specific line, so you never had to feel too bad about laughing, because they kept it nice and absurd, so you could just enjoy the general grossness of what was going on. But you were obviously rooting for the others to find Huey in time before Tech Knight gets to do what he's ultimately going to do, especially since by that point he's unmasked him and knows that it's Huey and doesn't care. He's still just going to cut a hole into him so he can screw it. It was like peak The Boys being darkly absurd and funny in a gross way. Ashley wiping her produce, shall we say, on the mask, things like that. Just those little details. Not that it made me laugh the most this episode. The most I laughed this episode, honestly, was probably a couple of moments with Sage, actually. Not that I've not really associated her with being one of the funny characters up until now. Not that she's had no moments like that, but she's more of the serious, like, plot-driving character, pretty much. But in this episode, after she gets shot by when they encounter her trying to get to Huey, and obviously they'd already set up that she won't die from a gunshot to the head. Her brain will just heal. But much like getting the lobotomy, her brain is healing, so she is dumb for a while. Almost every time, but especially when Homelander turned to her to help him explain to all the rich people how this is going to work, how their takeover of the government is going to work, and Homelander just went on a big speech, but all the rich people cut him off and say, yeah, but what about the reaction from this segment of the world, the military, or this segment from the stock markets, or from blah, blah, blah. And they give him a bunch of questions very quickly that he has no idea how to answer. And he turns to Sage, hoping that she's there to do it. And she is just stuffing her face with cake, and she's got like cake all over her face. Although that wasn't actually the moment that made me laugh the most. I think it was a moment before that where he looks at her when he comes in, and she's just going on about something. That made me laugh. And then likewise when Newman looks over at her at the end of her giving the big speech that saves the whole thing, with her basically aligning herself with Homelander seemingly. How much she really believes that and is going to follow through with it is a question I think that we should have. Especially since when Huey and Annie listen to the bugged playback later and they hear this speech, they're kind of in shock that she'd even go this far. So is she actually going to go through with all this? Is she really siding with Homelander, or is this, is she going to try and wiggle her way out of it later? I don't know. That said, though, she is motivated by the conversation with Sage earlier on, where Sage explains how she actually cured leukemia to save her own grandmother. But when she presented her findings as a child, because she's the smartest person in the world, to the doctors or whoever, the powers that be, they just laughed at her and patted her on the head. And she gives Newman this kind of speech of like, hey, no, we're not going to help everything. Human beings are awful, and the only way for people like us to get ahead, women of color in particular in this case, is to have one hand in their pocket and the other hand slit in their throat. And it kind of gives Newman a bit of a push to kind of like go further down the path. So I do think, at least in the moment Newman is genuine. Not that I think she necessarily thought about everything she was going to say in advance, but I think ultimately she was at least being genuine in the moment. But it's open for discussion, I would say. But yeah, there's a moment at the end though where Newman like looks over at Sage to give her a little nod, like, hey, I listened to you, I heard what you were saying to me, the message got through. But Sage is still dumb, so she just kind of nods back like multiple times and keeps nodding, and Newman just doesn't know what to do with it and eventually just has to turn back around. All that was cracking me up. I was having a great time. It's funny because I was thinking early on in this episode that the momentum felt a little bit stilted. Just in the context of the season as a whole, it feels like, we're in episode 6 out of 8. We've only got 2 more episodes after this, which is actually one of the reasons why, and I realize not everyone's going to agree with this because everyone has different opinions on the binge model versus the weekly model. But this is actually one of the reasons why I actually don't like that they put out 3 episodes the first week. I wish they didn't do that, because we're already so close to the end, and I don't want a binge model. I don't want all 8 episodes at once. That would be even worse for my tastes. I would rather it just be weekly from the start, 2 at most that first week. Not just because it's a pain to cover it, like that first week when it comes out and it messed up my schedule for reviewing things. That's obviously a specific to what I'm doing kind of complaint, but more just in the sense that we're already so far into the season. I would really like to enjoy it over the 8 weeks and really feel like I've got it in my life for a nice period of time. And it's not the same if you just wait after it's come out binge style. It feels very different, and so I this happens every season where we're almost at the end of the season too quickly. But what I was getting at though is the momentum at the start of this episode. It almost felt like, because we set up the butcher stuff with the scientist, with Newman's husband, and all these other things, it almost felt like this episode at the start had kind of reset momentum in a way where we're kind of starting to build new things. Probably stuff that's going to now carry us through to the end of the season. This is kind of building up the end game now. But it did kind of feel like just going to and he's in the office and he's doing the self-help tape kind of thing and trying to like relax himself. It felt like instead of like barreling through the next logical or natural part of the story, we're kind of like still slowing down, and then we have to set up where we're going for the rest of the episode. It doesn't take that long. It's not like a big deal, because once it got going and we're infiltrating the party, Huey being in this situation, having to wear the costume, everyone laughing at him, even though they promised they wouldn't, both Starlight and Kimiko just not being able to hold it in because it looks really silly. I also like that they addressed when he put on the costume, because of course, just a few episodes ago, Homelander could smell Huey. And not only that, he's got in there with Tech Knight, who we've established previously, especially in Gen V, that he has like super Sherlock Holmes abilities where he is ultra aware of when you're lying or if there's differences. He smells things, he sees things, he hears things more acutely. So they actually cover this by saying, oh no, this guy's outfit stinks. It is absolutely rancid. And that's what's going to cover that element of it. So I appreciate that they addressed that. Because they took away something that would have felt like a bit of a plot hole had he just went in there without any addressing of that. All that stuff is fun. Obviously, the clear Batman parallels that they have with Tech Knight, which they've always had because of the same Knight, if nothing else. But the idea that he's got the cave, of course, the idea that he was raised by his butler. Although the twist on it here is that when they get to the point where they've got Tech Knight strung up and they're forcing him to give them information, it's actually his butler that's raised him who starts to strangle him and says, "Oh, I had to raise this piece of shit. I've clean come out of so many holes, but he's building in concentration camps. I can't have that." And he's like strangling him. It really feels like he's finally, like, he's never had this opportunity before to just kill him. Which, on all the rest of that stuff, obviously you're really rooting for them to get to Huey by the time he's in danger. Like, not just in the awkward, this is like awful that he's having to suffer through some of this weird fetish sex stuff that's absurd, like farting into a cake. What? That is that a thing? Is that a real thing people are into? I don't. I know tickling's a real thing. I know that is something that some people do as a light sort of sexual torture thing. Like that's it's a I'm aware of that existence. I am not aware of farting into cakes or sitting in cakes with your bare ass. Honestly, the thought of mixing food with anything sexual sounds like the worst possible thing in the world to me. But once it's like a more of a real threat and Tech Knight knows he's Huey, you're kind of like gasping for them to get down there and help him. And they've heard enough over the comms to know where the entrance to the night cave is. If anything, I would say that it takes them too long to get to it. I guess it's a big house, so that's how they justify it. Because as soon as notices the paintings on the stairwell that Huey mentioned, they sort of like get to it quite quickly at that point. But it does feel like they're snooping about the house a long time before we get to that point. But that might just be more of a symptom of the fact that we're cutting around different plots, so it feels like a longer time than it actually is. But because it feels spread out over the episode, it feels like a reasonable amount of time by the time they start on the path to actually getting in there. And there's a whole thing where Starlight runs into Firecracker and calls her a C-bomb for what she did at the show where she brought up the abortion, and we see Starlight still getting heckled about that in the street at the start of the episode, but does go out of her way to apologize for what she did as a kid, and says that she's not the only person she did it to, and she has to accept that that's who she's always been, and that's something she has to make up for, specifically pointing out that she kind of almost branded that as Starlight, and that was kind of the emotional subtext of her trying to distinct herself from Starlight and Annie, was that she could sort of say all the bad stuff that I've ever done is associated with Starlight, and now she's having to sort of own that, no, all of that was me too, and I have to make up for, I am Starlight, I have to deal with that, it is me. So she goes out of her way to do that. She does just knock out Firecracker with a syringe, but that does happen. But they have the whole thing where MM has a panic attack, and it feels like, oh no, Huey's like almost getting cut open downstairs, and now instead of going straight down to help him, Kimiko has to go and whisper A-Train over to help. So A-Train has to take MM to the hospital. And I actually thought when Kimiko does a bit of parkour to get into the house, and she drops her phone and it smashes, I was thinking that was a plot setup that for for later on, someone would find the phone and maybe it would still turn on and they could see who it was and it would open a can of worms and get our characters in danger. What it actually ended up being, and this was way more fun, I guess, if for lack of a better word, was that when she has to argue with A-Train, because A-Train doesn't want to take MM to the hospital because he thinks he'll get caught and it'll get him killed by the Homelander team and whatnot, she doesn't have her phone to communicate, right? And we're reminded at the start of the episode, as she's been doing for seasons at this point, when she tries to visit Frenchie at the prison, she's like using her phone to talk to people, right, who don't read sign language. She's using the phone, and she doesn't have it. So she has to start just rummaging through the books that Tech Knight's got in his library and finds one that says hospital, and like that's how she says, take him to the hospital. And he's like, no, I can't do that. And then she eventually has to find one that says for the sake of his daughter. But her rummaging through multiple books to finally get to one that would express what she's trying to say, I actually thought was a really cool little mechanic for the scene, because it's a very high tense scene in the sense that there's a lot of things on a timer right now, helping MM, helping Huey, there's a lot of people at stake, and to have the character who can't speak have to look through just random literature to express herself is kind of interesting. And like, I mean, I'm not suggesting that they really meant it to be this deep of a scene, but in a weird way, it's almost kind of like what art is in general. It's someone or a group of people trying to express some key ideas and points through art. So she's literally looking through literature, works of art, to just help express herself in a more straightforward way, where it's literally just the words on the page on the front covers. But still, I just think it's an interesting little comparison to make there. But once they get down and they've got Tech Night, obviously Annie and Kimiko. Annie shows up by the time they're going down. They take out Tech quite quickly, and he wakes up, strapped to his big thing. I don't even know what to call the damn thing. His big X, which is for sexual pleasure purposes. And they have the problem where Kimiko starts stabbing him in the leg to make him talk, and he just starts enjoying it. He just starts saying, yeah, oh baby, yeah, hurt me, and then eventually starts saying, rub my balls and other gross shit. The look of confusion on their faces is delightful, because they're like, wait, what? And then Huey finally says, how do you torture a masochist? How do you do that? It's not possible. And what I've not mentioned is that there's a gimp, like the previous sidekick or sex slave or whatever we're going to call them. The previous gimp has been like chained up in the corner of the whole scene and is eventually able to like break from the wall. And it's at this point where they go up to the laptop and show that, hey, this is all of his bank accounts. All you have to do is scan his eye and you can start doing things with his money. So that's what they do. I actually thought they were going to have like a reveal of who this gimp was. It was either someone we'd recognize or maybe the gimp would come with them. Instead, the gimp stays behind and helps the butler with the crime of Tech Knight's death. So, I mean, we'll see. I don't know if we'll get an update on the gimp and the butler, but I hope we see them again, or maybe get a little breadcrumb as to how things turned out for them after this. But they basically torture him where he actually cares and starts screaming, no, 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 please no, by spending millions of his dollars on charities and causes that he does not agree with. The last one was Black Lives Matter, and that's the one that really makes him go, no, don't give my money to them. And he gets really upset and finally starts talking that he's been working with Homelander in Sage to basically build more prisons or use his prisons to put everyone that they want to lock up. So it's interim camps, it's all that kind of thing. And it's, it really paints a picture of what they're going to be doing. So they get their key information. And obviously, as well, we found out earlier on when he was bragging about his wealth, like Firecracker's kind of naive and says, oh, I can't wait to have all this, because you have all this from being an entertainer. And he corrects her and says, oh, this is not from being an entertainer. This is like proper wealth. This is passed down through generations. And in front of A-Train, in fact, repeatedly looking at A-Train, points out that his great-grandfather was a slave catcher, and even cracks some jokes about how, oh, you'd have given my grandfather a run for his money, and just flaunts it in his face, and A-Train just has to bite his tongue and say something civil. Of course, Firecracker thinks this is all hilarious. This is all up her street as far as humor goes. So there's more of that, more of like just the blatant, just casual racism in front of various characters and them having to hold back or just put up with it. So by the time all of his money has been given away, and the fact that the one that is the tipping point where he has to give in is Black Lives Matter, is actually a good payoff to finding out where his money came from at the start of the episode. So I have to applaud the setup and payoff of that. I'm almost sad that Tech Knight's gone though, potentially, because it means no more silly hole jokes from Gen V. I did enjoy that gag, if you will. Pardon the word. I know that he's all into gagging as well, but that's, there's a whole there's a whole like plethora of words that's become like a minefield when you start talking about the subject of S&M and weird sex like stuff. There's just so many things that come in. Hell, it's not very many episodes of TV shows where I hear the word Sibian, okay? That's something Sage said when she wanted a Taco Bell and a Sibian at one point, when she was being dumb. Apparently being dumb makes her hungry and horny. That's just, for whatever reason, that's when Sage gets that way, is when she's dumb. But yeah, so... right, so that was all that. And as much as it is mostly really gross, silly, like darkly funny stuff, I think it does hit at the end when Huey breaks down and says, Ashley, masturbated whilst tickling my feet. And she's like, what? And she's like, oh, Huey, what else happened? And then he breaks down, and what he's really breaking down about is that, he is upset about his dad's death, right? He's been pretending from the start that he wants to focus on work, and he's just fine to do so, but he's actually being emotionally vulnerable at the end and opening up, and it's all that. So that scene was fairly effective. Likewise, MM being told by the doctor that he didn't have a heart attack, which is what MM assumed it was. It was actually a panic attack, which makes sense given like his stress levels, the hives that he's been mentioning that he's been having, and he needs to cool things down and try and not do whatever he's doing that's making him stressed. Admittedly, given the line of work he's in, that may be difficult. I could see maybe there'd been a change of position for him at the end of the season, perhaps. Then again, we only have one season after this, so maybe he'll ride it out, and this will just sort of crank up the drama, the tension of him having maybe a potential weakness if things go bad. So elsewhere in the episode, Homelander, of course, is with Ryan. He's schmoozing with everyone. He's mostly just complaining that no one's around. The big things with him really are two scenes. One where he tries to give his speech to rally them all up and realizes that he's not good at it, that he doesn't have answers for them, which is what leads to Newman giving the speech and kind of saving the whole thing. But the other scenes with Firecracker, where basically they realized that if Starlight and the others were there, then they didn't fix the leak, right? It wasn't the news guy, which, by the way, Firecracker's now doing his job and talking about Jewish space lasers or something. It's just an ultra conspiracy nut job stuff. But he's basically, what if you're the leak, and gets all threatening with Firecracker. And Firecracker, throughout this episode, actually gets kind of upset. In fact, when Annie runs into her, she's been crying in the bathroom because she's there as like an accessory and to be the peppy one, but she's not included in the conversations with her. Sage tells her to piss off and that they're having a private conversation, and it makes her feel left out. It makes her feel like she's not being utilized. And I think given the way The Boys is, you could maybe see that as maybe the start of a pivot for her character, especially since Annie then forgave her right after. Maybe you could see, maybe she'll go down the A-Train path of eventually realizing who these people are and maybe having a moment of growth. And it wouldn't happen right away, but maybe this could be the first step towards her realizing what she's doing is wrong, turning over a new leaf, growing into a better person, whatever. Instead, when she's given the opportunity, when she's getting threatened by Homelander, she uses that moment to kind of assert how loyal she is and that she feels that she owes everything to Homelander and she'd do anything for Homelander. And he doesn't care to begin with. He's like, I don't care. And he gets all scary and she keeps speaking. And eventually, it does seem like she is being so super thankful that he's kind of like maybe enjoying how much she clearly adores him by the end. Not that he's attracted to her. In fact, he specifically says he isn't when she starts to unzip her top. But I think in the performance from Homelander, you could definitely see towards the end of her when she's being so like gushingly like, no, you're everything to me. Like, you gave me everything. My life's so much better because of you. Effectively implying that she can never, ever be the leak, that she would never betray him. And the idea that maybe he'll recognize this as true loyalty, that this is what loyalty actually is, kind of thing. At least that's what she's trying to sell him. And then finally proves it by unzipping her top, and he's like, hey, what are you doing? I'm not attracted to you sexually. And she's like, I know, this isn't about sex, this is about, can't remember what the line was. Maybe it was just loyalty. But either way, she squirts milk at him. He gets squirted in the face, he kind of reacts like, oh, like he gets a little shiver. And he's like, you're not pregnant. How is this possible? And she's like, oh yeah, you can take a bunch of drugs and it enlarges your heart a bit, but you can make it happen. And he's like, you did that for me? And she's like, I'll do anything for you. Cut to a shot where she's cradling him in his arms as he's sucking, as Sage once put it, on them titties, as she says, there's a good boy, and strokes his hair as he's sucking on the milk. It's... I guess she's finally won over Homelander with a very, very particular service that he deeply, deeply desires. I will be curious to see how this reverberates with Sage once Homelander maybe now says, no, Firecracker's high ranking, she gets to be here now, she gets to be involved in everything, I trust her, whatever it may be. And in fact, he might even not feel so good about Sage because of her performance, even if he understands that she was dumb because she got shot in the head. I don't know if he'll just accept that. Maybe he'll still hold a grudge because he's Homelander, and that may not stop him from being a dick about it. But either way, this definitely feels like a big turning point here. And unless Firecracker dies in the finale of the season, which is possible, I could see this being a longer, I could see her being like a prominent character still for all of season 5. But that's assuming she's not killed off in a big moment this season. But I could definitely see this being the start of a longer kind of relationship of sorts with Homelander. Not necessarily a romantic relationship, just a relationship. Elsewhere, we have Billy, and we have Billy with the scientist. Last episode, I felt already confirmed that Kessler was in his head. This episode, of course, actually reveals it by the end of the episode, which I did like how it did this, to be fair. I don't necessarily think we needed the little flashbacks to all the previous moments showing that Kessler wasn't actually there. That felt like it was maybe spelling it out to the audience a little bit. I think, though, the actual moment where it revealed it was really well done, and that is that throughout the episode, he's speaking to Kessler about whatever, and the scientist is there. He's speaking to Becca at some points. Becca's trying to talk him out of this, and he even tried to save Ryan anymore. Makes this great point, actually, at one moment where she's like, hey, if you kill Homelander, you're just going to kill Homelander and make another. The idea being that if he goes through with this and can't be the better person, then he's not going to instill any better qualities into Ryan. Instead, Ryan's probably going to see it as a monstrous act and go down the path that Homelander's setting him on, right? This idea of the battle for Ryan's soul has been a big thing we've been talking about for a while now, and I feel like that's what she was really getting at, is that this might be the point of no return where you make sure Ryan is going to be just another Homelander, and you have to like fight against that. But by the end of the episode, I said that they were kind of like the angel and devil on his shoulders. We get a scene where they're both there. They're actually both in the same scene, and it sort of like goes between them trying to debate with Butcher about what to do. And this comes after the scientist makes it clear that if there's a strain that's made to kill Homelander, and Butcher says he only wants one dose to kill Homelander. It has to be strong enough, but that's what he wants. The scientist makes it clear, if it's strong enough to kill Homelander, then it will become unstable, and it will spread, it will be airborne, and every soup will be in danger. And Becca, quite, in his head, quite rightly says, that's Annie, that's Kimiko, and then Butcher actually says out loud, Ryan. And of course, the scientist cares about soups. He's got a wife and a daughter that are soups. Again, I don't know if they're married. I said that a bunch of times last episode, but either way, he cares about them, and that's that. So this is where the real sort of angel and devil thing really starts to play out in real time. So that analogy for this, I think, was perfect for this scene, right? We kind of saw that coming in a lot of ways. But the moment that it reveals that they're both in his head is simply Kessler turning and saying something to Becca, specifically telling her to shut up, right? And being really crude about it. But this idea of him turning and speaking to her being the reveal, I actually thought was a really good way of doing it. Because the episode, or the show, has made no attempts to hide what Becca is, right? She's always been in his head since episode 1 of the season. It was made very, very clear that's what she was. And they've done a little reveal here that the other character he's been talking to is also in his head. So by sort of like doing that as a shorthand, obviously Butcher has a moment where he's like, wait, you can see her? How is that possible? But of course, the only answer is that they're both in his head. And that, if you're really looking for it as well, you can see it throughout the whole episode. Every time we're here with Butcher and Kessler's around and they're talking in front of the scientist never talks to both of them at the same time. He's always talking to one or the other. So it's very clear that Butcher's just whatever version he's talking to at that point, kind of thing. So yeah, obviously this is a pretty big point for Butcher, this decision that he now has to make, right? It's not just that he has a chance to kill Homelander and whether or not that's the right thing to do to show Ryan what's good and what's bad and to sort of inspire him to be the person that he could be. He's straight up given this choice of like, you can kill Homelander, but it'll potentially kill everyone else. And Kessler's in his head saying, that's what we want. It's a total genocide. We wanted to, and Butcher's like, hey, no one said anything about genocide. He's like, yeah, you did. You said you wanted to kill every single one of them, and I remember him saying that. I don't remember what episode it was, but I remember him saying, we're going to kill all the Supes, every last one of them. He was very much like that, especially back in season 1 era of the show. So there's a lot of big weight to this decision. Obviously, this plot line, this episode, feels very separate from everything else. It's very much, we just sort of check in on it every once in a while, and then it uses this moment, this decision that he's being presented with as the big sort of end cut to black moment of the episode, which is effective. I think the decision has enough weight to be that moment for the end of the episode. Yeah, it's another solid episode. If I have any critique, really, it's just that I don't know if it feels like momentum-wise we feel like we're gearing towards the finale. That said, though, all the episodes of The Boys are a full 60 minutes. Sometimes they're a little bit over that, actually, even once you take off the credits. So it's not entirely impossible that we'll feel really geared up for the finale by the end of the next episode. It just, momentum-wise, feels like maybe some previous seasons have done a better job of having that momentum at the right place at the right time in the season. But admittedly, like, this is not necessarily a big deal. Like, next episode, if it nails all that stuff just right, I'll forget I ever said this about this episode, and it won't be a big deal. But that's one of the interesting things about talking about them episode by episode as they're coming out, is you kind of get to study it as an individual episode of a TV show, how it fits into the whole season, and the experience of the whole season over the span of time, which is part of the art form. Which is another reason why I don't really like binge style releases. I think it just removes too much of what makes TV TV. I never mentioned last episode that Newman stopped Edgar from going back to prison. And yes, people reminded me what his name was because I couldn't remember it last time, which is briefly mentioned this episode. Homelander brings it up to Newman. I should probably also mention as well that when A-Train takes MM to the hospital, he actually feels a moment of... this kid smiles at him, and he is happy because he felt like he just did a good thing, right? That this kid looked up to him as a hero who just saved someone's life by bringing him to the hospital. And just a minute ago, he'd been arguing not to do that. He didn't want to do it because it was too risky. So again, it's kind of like pushing A-Train down this redemption path, which is it's a tough sell in a lot of ways because of all the choices he made last season when it felt like he could begin down that path and didn't. Definitely was going to make this a tough sell, but there's all these little things that are being done quite well. I also like the idea that he goes to Canada to make a phone call just in case Homelander can overhear him. I thought that was funny when he said he was in Toronto at the start. So yeah, that's a plus too. That's my thoughts on episode 6 of The Boys. By all means, let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. And you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for helping keeping the lights on and all that. But that is me. So thank you once again. I'll see you guys next time. Actually, I probably should talk about Kimiko trying to visit Frenchie, shouldn't I? That was such like a minor part of the episode. All things, I mean, don't get me wrong. It was sweet that Kimiko is like adamant she wants to see him. But the key plot point here is that Frenchie is refusing visitation. He clearly doesn't feel like he wants to see her. Whether that's because he feels guilty and doesn't want to face her, whether that's because he doesn't think he deserves to have visitors because of what he's done and it's still part of the guilt trip. Either way, it's a thing. I don't really have too many thoughts on the scenes themselves and how they were presented, but that is me. Thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?